My name is Pete Marcus. For those of you who don't know me, I'm president of the Ardsley Historical Society. We're the organization that sponsored the event today. First, I'd like to thank Houlihan from the Ardsley Fire Department for letting us use this venue. Obviously, the crowd that we have here today would not fit in our room on the second floor of the library. So thank you very much. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I see in the back we have a couple of our elected officials that I'd like to introduce. First and foremost, our beloved mayor, Nancy Houlihan. And to her left, Greenberg Town Supervisor, Paul Feiner. And a very familiar face, but in a new position, we have Mary Jane Shimsky, who's for those of you that are not members of the Ardsley Historical Society or are not familiar with our organization, we've been in existence for 41 years. Our main mission is to collect and preserve pieces of Ardsley history. And we collect those artifacts and store them in a room on the second floor of the Ardsley Public Library. Part of our mission is also education. Recently, I conducted a Zoom presentation for all of the second grades at Convoy Road, communicating to them how the village got its name of Ardsley, which is an interesting story. Also, this used to be a farming community, and the big product that people produced was cucumbers because of the way the soil was and so on. So at one time there were actually 3 different companies that were making pickles out of those cucumbers. So that was a big product for Ardsley back in the day. And we also talked about the railroad. There was a railroad station here in Ardsley, part of the Putnam line, and that, as much as anything, led to the transformation of the village from a farming community to what it is today, which is a residential community. Last April, we had a dedication ceremony for a historical marker at the site of the old Ardsley train station, and that's over by the South County Trailway. If you make it over there, there's a QR code sign, which if you scan, it'll take you to a web page that gives you lots more information. We've also been very involved with the middle school local history club, and we got them involved back in the fall. We invited them up to the library, second floor. We showed them a selection of our archives, and then they went back and voted on which ones they wanted to see displayed in the lobby of their school. And they wrote up little descriptions for each artifact. That was in the middle school lobby for several months, and then it traveled at the end of December to the high school, where it's been since the end of December, and any day now it's going to be transferred back to the middle school lobby. So for those of you that are interested in seeing those artifacts, of course, our prize artifact is the Revolutionary War cannonball, which a resident found in her garden when she was gardening. And we had that certified by the foundry that made it at West Point. So that is a for real artifact of the Revolutionary War. Sorry about that. We also involved the Middle School History Club last October when we dedicated another historical marker. This one's up by the high school, and this was to commemorate the 6-week period during the summer of 1781 when part of the Continental Army camped and trained there while Washington was having meetings, strategy meetings with General Rochambeau, whose French forces had traveled from Newport, Rhode Island to this area. And the golf club that is on the Underhill Road is the area where they camped, and there's actually a marker commemorating where they camped. And then at the end of that 6-week period, the two forces traveled down to Yorktown, Virginia, which is, they say, history celebrates the fact that we defeated the British there and gained independence for the nation. So that marker, we had a ceremony back in October. We involved the middle school history club in reading part of that historical narrative. Again, that also has a QR code, so if you travel up to the high school, right on Farm Road at the entrance, you can see that marker. 2 years ago, Rob Pellegrino, the village historian, and I conducted a number of walking tours for both new and old residents, and some of you may have taken part in those. It was about a 90-minute walk and talk session. We handed out booklets with pictures of buildings, some of which have changed focus, others are no longer in existence. And for example, across the way, what is now Ashford Court Condominiums used to be the main school in Ardsley. It was built in 1912. Initially it was K-12, and then as the population grew, they built Concord Road School, so those grades moved over. And then they built a new high school in '58. Those grades went over, and until '71, when the new middle school was built, that's where the middle school was housed. How many of you in the audience are members of the Ardsley Historical Society? Very, very good. For those of you who aren't, we have our webmaster in the back. Blake, wave to us, please. He has a table there with membership forms if you're so inclined to become members. We also have some copies of our fall newsletter, free of charge. We let you take that. And if you want to go out to our website, which is very simply ardsleyhistoricalsociety.org, you can learn some more about some of the information that we have. So those newsletters are free of charge. One of the benefits of being a member is you get 2 newsletters a year, one in the spring, one in the fall, plus a pictorial calendar. And we have a few copies left of our 2023 calendar back as well. So please consider that. And also we have a little donation box if you're so inclined to leave us with a donation to help defray some of the costs of today's meeting. Besides the elected politicians, we have a number of Irish organizations in the audience. We have the president of the Ladies Ancient Order of Iberians of Tarrytown. Where's Alice? And we also have a representative from the American Irish Association of Westchester. Where's Eileen? There she is. If we're talking about Irish, we've got to talk about Mary Kean, who's responsible for the refreshments. Where's Mary? I know people take great pride in their soda bread, so I won't say that Mary makes the best soda bread in Westchester. I will tell you, since my wife is not here, that it's the best soda bread that I've had. Get any place. We have a number of copies of this, which we're going to pass out momentarily. Village historian put this together, which basically shows by state the Irish ancestry as a percentage of each state's population. And just so you know, that in New York State, it's over 2 million Irish residents in the state, which is about 14%. In Westchester County, it's a little under 12%, and in New York City, it's only about 2%. But we don't have enough copies, unfortunately, for everyone, but we'll pass around maybe one per row, and you can just share that to get an idea. Now, the Great Hunger Memorial, which you see pictured here, and we have a model here, and some close-up photos here. How many of you have actually seen that up close? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Because if you may have noticed, if you've ever walked recently on the South County Trailway, there's a big county project going on, which pretty much prevents you from getting a good look at the monument. It's not impossible, but it's not easy to get to. I'll just say that. So at the end of the talk today, feel free to come on up and look at these items. We're very happy for our speaker today to have with us James J. Houlihan, who was the chairperson of the committee that solicited designs and selected that, as well as the fundraising to pay for this. I won't step on Jim's thunder here, but we're certainly lucky to have him. By way of introduction, Jim is a graduate of Manhattan Preparatory School and of Fordham University School of Business. He represents the fourth of 5 generations of the family business, Houlihan Farms Realtors, which was founded in 1891 by his great-grandfather, Daniel Houlihan. Jim is the managing principal of this multifaceted commercial real estate firm, and he has managed its daily operations since becoming a partner in 1987. Jim served as the chairman of the Great Hunger Memorial Committee of Westchester County that created a critically acclaimed monument commemorating and furthermore the period known as the Great Hunger in Ireland from 1845 to 1851. Jim has been honored as a recipient of the prestigious Ellis Island Medal of Honor in 2000 for his varied humanitarian efforts. He was also named to Irish America's Magazine Top 100 list in 2001 and to the Top 100 business list annually from 2006 through 2009, and again in 2019 and 2022. He received the Irish Arts Center's Spirit of Ireland Award in 2001 and the Irish American Building Society Award in 2007. His speaking engagements have included Columbia University, New York University, Fordham University, and the New School for Social Research. Jim has served for 2 terms on the Westchester County Parks Department Board. He was the committee chairman for the successful fundraising effort for the Rising, a memorial dedicated to the 109 Westchester County residents who lost their lives on September 11, 2001. The Westchester County Board of Legislators honored him with the first ever Chairman's Medal of Gratitude in 2004. Westchester County Parks Department honored Mr. Houlihan with their Best Friends Award in 2010. Mr. Houlihan received the Pro Patrick Award from St. Patrick's Home at their 80th anniversary dinner in November 2011. In 2020, 21, and 22, Jim was named the Grand Marshal of the White Plains St. Patrick's Day Parade. Jim has received the esteemed Martin S. Berger Award for Lifetime Achievement in Real Estate. This prestigious award acknowledged Mr. Houlihan for his outstanding accomplishments in the real estate industry and service to his community. He received this award at the 30th anniversary of the March of Dimes Real Estate Breakfast in Westchester County in November of 2017. He was also honored by the Knights of St. Patrick in 2018. In 2020, 21, and 22, he was named the Grand Marshal of the White Plains St. Patrick's Day Parade. Jim and his wife, Pat, currently reside in Bronxville, New York, as well as a home in Nantucket, Massachusetts. They were jointly honored in 2015 by the Holocaust and Human Rights Commission in Westchester County, They have 5 grown children and 6 grandchildren. Without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Mr. James.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everybody. I have a lot of friends in the audience and family in the audience. And we also have, I guess maybe most importantly, a number of people who are involved in the project. So before we get started, I'd like to just introduce them and acknowledge them and thank them for the help. My right-hand man all through the process, John McCarthy, sitting right back here. John, stand up, take a bow. And my left-hand woman, my wife Pat, was also on the committee and was extremely helpful and dedicated in this process. So Pat, take a bow. And we have from the Westchester County Parks Department, who was instrumental in helping create this memorial and finding a site, Kathy O'Connor, who's a commissioner. Kathy, are you here? Oh, there you are. Stand up, take a bow. And we also have last Sunday's Grand Marshal to the Sleepy Hollow Parade. Yes, Pat Scova. Pat, stand up, take a bow. And is there anyone else I missed? No? That's it. Okay, great. And then also we have other people who were involved. So we have Barbara D'Angelo here today. So glad she came. So Barbara helped us with all of our printing materials. And I thought I'd just bring Barbara up for a second so she could show you what we created as part of our marketing, et cetera. So Barbara, come on up.
I don't know what.
Yeah, you can show them.
Okay, well, this is afterwards. If you want to take a look, this is the journal that we did for the event that has history through. It's scattered throughout. That's really very interesting. And then we found, as we were searching for the journals, the plates that were used to emboss. So it's a replication of the. So I'll pass it around. It's very heavy, but I'll start passing it around. And then this is just a plate that the Great Hunger Memorial. And that's it. I'll pass this one out this way.
Thank you, Barbara. So my grandmother, who was from County Tyrone, my mother's mother, had only about 1 million sayings. And one of her favorite sayings, which I heard 1 million times, was "Many hands make light work." And certainly that proved true with our efforts to build this memorial. And it was a long, convoluted story that unfortunately didn't end at the dedication, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I thought, first of all, since I don't assume that everybody knows the whole history of the Great Hunger in Ireland, let's do a little bit of a history brush up, and then we can talk about the whole creation of the memorial. And I personally love history and reading about history. I loved hearing about some of the things that your group is doing. And, I love reading, especially about Civil War and Revolutionary War. But, when you think about it, the challenges that George Washington and his army faced in beating the greatest, the mightiest army in the whole world, and they were able to pull it off. And they had long odds against them. They were outnumbered. The British had more artillery, guns, etc. A lot of the soldiers who volunteered for the Revolutionary Service were underfed, underclothed. A lot of them didn't get paid for a long period of time. And of course, the British were known for their brutality. So when not only soldiers, but Americans who lived in Westchester and all throughout the colonies were captured by the British, they received terrible treatment. There were prison ships in the Hudson River where most of the prisoners did not survive. The conditions were abominable, and that was about par for the course for the English. They treated pretty much everybody else as second-class citizens or like livestock. And it wasn't just in the colonies here or in Ireland, but it was anywhere they went in the world. So whether you were in India or you were in Jamaica or whatever, the indigenous people really received terrible treatment over extended periods of time. So we talk about this period as being en garde à mort, which is translation is the Great Hunger. We don't call it the Irish famine because famine connotes a concept of a shortage of food. So in Ireland, there wasn't a shortage of food, but there was a shortage of one very important staple for the peasants. So we have our first visual aid. Peter, you want to show our people? What is Peter holding? A potato. Has everybody here eaten a potato? Yes. Does everybody love potatoes? Yes. Okay. So the peasants in Ireland, particularly the ones who lived on the west coast of Ireland, were almost totally dependent on this one staple for survival. And it was not unusual for an Irish peasant to consume somewhere between 12 and 14 pounds of potatoes a day. Just plain boiled potatoes, maybe with a little bit of buttermilk, maybe a few scraps of other vegetables they were able to grow. But the west coast of Ireland, which was the part that was worst hit by the Irish Great Hunger period of time, were mostly small tenant farmers that go back to when the English came in, and they were not the first invaders. The Irish were invaded by the Romans and by the Vikings over hundreds of years. But when the British came in, they defeated the Irish aristocracy at the Battle of the Boyne in the late 17th century. The people who were able to survive that and who were Catholic, they fled to France, who was an enemy of England. And England brought in a number of English, Scottish settlers to Ireland and basically gave them the land that belonged to the Irish people. And instantaneously, the people who owned these farms went from being owners of farms to being tenants who had to pay rent to the British landlord. Probably you could imagine this didn't go over too well with the Irish people. And the land was divided into very small plots. So it was, and the best land for agrarian purposes in Ireland is in the northeast part of the country, which is still today affiliated with Great Britain. Is now called Northern Ireland. So the farms in Western Ireland were rocky, not great soil. So they needed to figure out, or they needed to grow something that would be able, they could survive on. And these potatoes grew in the ground. They didn't need very much cultivation, and they were relatively easy to harvest. And then they would put these in a shed or whatever over the winter months and cover them with straw, and the potatoes would not rot, and they were able to sustain themselves on this plain but very hearty diet. And the potato diet that they sustained on gave them basically all of the nutrients and vitamins they needed to be healthy. So earlier in the 1800s, before this period of time we're going to talk about, there were other famines in Europe, not just in Ireland, or famine is not the right word, other blights to the potato stock throughout Europe. So countries like Poland, Germany, etc., which are also heavy consumers of potatoes, starting in, I think it was 1832, was the first blight where the potatoes basically were attacked by a fungus, which turned the potatoes rotten in the ground. So when the peasants would go to harvest them, they would be black, giving off a bad odor, and they were not able to be consumed. And so when you're totally dependent on basically one food staple and it's taken away from you, disaster follows. The implications of this were pretty severe, because right away people went from being able to sustain themselves to being desperate for food. And so they became dependent on the English landlords and the British government to find ways to help them. And unfortunately, a number of the landlords who had supplanted the Irish property owners wanted the Irish peasants gone. So they wanted them to leave so they could turn the land into basically sheep grazing. So some of the English landlords actually, even during this period of time, paid the Irish peasants for their steerage passage to America to clear the land. At the time when the first blight that hit the Irish population here in 1845, there was estimated about 12 million people living in Ireland. By the end of this period, 7, 8 years later, the population had shrunk to 4 million people. And that was through death, disease, and forced emigration. And Ireland was the only country in Europe that went through a loss of population. At the same time when all these other countries had increasing population, the Irish population decreased dramatically and really has never recovered. I think the current population of Ireland today is somewhere between 5 and 6 million people. But if you look at any other country in Europe, the population has increased since this period of time in history. So the thing that was really terrible, let's talk about the British response, the government response. They basically didn't really handle the situation well at all. They set up soup kitchens. Part of the effort was to, well, we'll give you aid if you decide that you want to convert from Catholicism to the Protestant religion, which the Irish people refused to do. Some of the workhouses that were set up in Ireland required these peasants who were starving to death, sick, in bad shape, to work for their food. So in the west coast of Ireland, there are roads, they call them roads that go nowhere, or go to nowhere. And so these people would be sent out scantily clad, exposed to the conditions, to build these roads so they could get meager sustenance when they came back. The other problem with these aid houses was the English insisted that the families be separated. So the women went in one house and the men went in the other house. Children were separated from parents. So it doesn't take a big imagination to understand that the Irish people didn't see this as a great alternative. With the emigration, most of the peasants who left Ireland were never going to come back. There was no way for them to get back, and a number of them didn't survive the journey. You may have heard the term coffin ships. So the conditions were terrible. They were basically below in steerage. Disease was rampant and traveled. A lot of rats on any ship. And the Irish peasants were expected to bring their food with them. They weren't fed by the captain and the crew. So they were at sea for 5, 6 weeks, and they were expected to survive on their own. So unfortunately, many people didn't survive. Of the ones who came to Canada and the United States, many of them died shortly after they arrived. In fact, in the 1850s, the average life expectancy of an Irish immigrant arriving in the New World was 10 years. I'm going to play a song which is called An Irish Lament for you. I think my microphone should pick it up. And I have 2 other songs I've also brought on my phone that will demonstrate different parts of this process. But this song is an Irish lament. It's about a place in Western Cork, which is the southwest part of Ireland, and it's called Skibbereen, and it really tells the kind of the sad story of what happened. And it's sung by Sinead O'Connor. Some of you may be familiar with her. So with your permission, I'll play that right now.
Oh, Father dear, I oft times hear you talk of Erin's Isle, her lofty scenes and valleys green, her mountains rude and wild. They say it is a pretty place wherein a prince might dwell. Oh, why did you abandon it? The reason to me tell. Oh, son, I love my native land with energy
I just got to cut off there. I'm not going to play the whole song, but that gives you a little idea of the trauma and the dramatic pain that the people went through at that time. Another part of this story was not only emigration, but forced deportation of Irish people to Australia. So a lot of the Irish were either came to the United States or Canada. Some went to England and worked in the factories in England, and some were deported for minor crimes. So if you've ever been to Dublin and you go to Kilmainham jail, which is where a number of the martyrs of the 1916 uprising were executed, there's an interesting display where they actually have the logbooks of the Irish peasants who were arrested during this time, and what they were arrested for and what the sentence was. So the one that really stuck in my mind was a young girl got arrested for stealing a loaf of bread, and she was deported to Australia for 7 years. So she was basically in slavery for 7 years for stealing a loaf of bread, separated from her country, her friends, her family, and then at the end of 7 years, she had no literal hope of ever coming back to Ireland. She was in Australia for the rest of her life. And part of the reason, or the psychology of why the British actually deported a lot of women to Australia, not just men convicts, etc., was they didn't want the English farmers and settlers there to marry the indigenous people of Australia, the Aborigines. They wanted them to stay 100% pure white, so they imported white women from Ireland, and they were expected to be the people who would marry and bear children of the white settlers. The immigration is something that has stayed with the Irish people since this time, this great immigration, and Ireland has over the years sent off, in some ways maybe their brightest and best, all over the world, because there wasn't enough jobs until recently in Ireland for them. So in the 1800s, you might remember from your school days, there was this thing called the Industrial Revolution. And people started to invent machines that were able to create products and transportation that changed the world dramatically. And the Industrial Revolution started in England and also in the United States, and then spread to other countries. But it really never happened in Ireland because the English wanted to keep Ireland as basically a food supply chain for the British factory workers. And during the period of the Great Hunger, there were 55 warehouses in Ireland that had all kinds of food that was harvested, but it was denied to the Irish population that was starving to death. And it was protected by armed soldiers, British soldiers, transported under armed guard to various ports and then shipped to England to feed the English. So it was just another added insult to injury, if you will. I don't want to really continue on about this, but I just wanted to give you, if you weren't aware, what kind of a desperate situation it was. And in a lot of ways, Ireland didn't recover because the mindset of the people was that they were ashamed of what had happened, that people had, from their own families, had starved and there wasn't enough food for them and they weren't able to help them. So it became something that was not talked about. And it was a footnote in a book, but it wasn't even really taught extensively in the schools in Ireland. And in the 1990s, which we were coming up to the 150th anniversary of this tragic period of time, Bishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa started to go annually to Ireland and do these walks, and they called them famine walks or hunger walks, that commemorated a particularly horrific event. So there was a number of Irish peasants who went out in the middle of winter and walked equivalent of about 5 miles to the English lord's house, where he was throwing a big party for his fellow lords to implore them for help and sustenance. And they were turned away. He refused to see them. And on the way back, basically a gale came up out of nowhere, and a number of the peasants were actually blown off the side of the mountain. And so this famine walk started in, I think, around 1990 to commemorate this horrific time. and to kind of create an awareness, first of all in Ireland and then around the rest of the world, about how much a tragedy this was, and it was totally avoidable if the right steps would have been taken. And as part of this kind of awakening, some people in Westchester got together and said, well, we've had a lot of Irish immigrated to New York and Westchester. We should have a memorial in Westchester to commemorate this period of time. And so in the 1990s, a committee was formed. Then a local legislator from Yonkers, Lou Marciello, was involved, and it had the support of our county executive, Andy O'Rourke, and then following him, Andy Spano. And I was asked to be part of that committee, and I was. And unfortunately, nothing happened for a couple of years. We had two different people who basically agreed to be chairman, and then, for whatever reason, decided that they couldn't do the job. So after the second chairman had stepped down, what are we going to do? We're going to disband, etc. And Lou told me this after the fact. He went to see Andy Spano and said, I really don't want to be part of something that's, not going to go anywhere. And Andy said, well, if you really want the thing done, go ask Jim Houlihan if he'll do it. And if he says he'll do it, you'll get the thing done. So that's a nice reputation to have. So he approached me, and I said, okay, we'll figure out a way to do it. Now, I had never built a work of public art. I don't have an art degree. I don't have a history degree. I'm a businessman who took mostly business courses in college. But I do like, as I said before, history and to read, to go to museums, etc. So I made it my business to basically read and get advice and talk to as many people as I could to figure out, okay, how should we approach this? What should we do, etc. And we were fortunate at that time to have the help of Janet Langsam and the Arts Council in Westchester, who helped us and guided us through the process of how we would have a competition to hire an artist, and how we would look at the different proposals we got. We actually wound up getting 39 proposals from artists from all over the world, not just this area. We hired a renowned sculptor, Eamon O'Doherty. Unfortunately, he was not with us anymore, but Eamon had done a number of works of public art, mostly in Ireland, but also I think there were a few other, maybe in England there were a few. He did a marvelous job, and he was a delight to work with. He was a real, what we call an Irish character. And then, of course, the question was, well, where are we going to put this memorial? So the first iteration was it was going to go in front of the county courthouse in White Plains on what is now, I think, Martin Luther King Boulevard. And so we thought that would be great. It would get a lot of exposure. And as they say, the devil is in the details. So when we tried to move forward, we found out that the city of White Plains wanted to have a say, and the library was there, so the library board wanted to have a say. They all wanted to have approval rights. And we said, no, we can't have a memorial that's going to be tied up with some kind of political process. So I went and talked to Andy Spano, and he was really terrific. He said, Jim, I really want to help you. I really want to see this done. And it wasn't hot air. It was the real stuff. And he said, you can put it on any piece of county land that we own as far as I'm concerned. And he then turned me over to the Parks Department, and Kathy O'Connor was assistant commissioner then to Joe Stout. Joe Stout was the commissioner, and they were really terrific, and they came up with a number of suggestions. And at that time, I think there were plans to renovate V.E. Macy Park, and you talked about the North-South County Trail. Why don't you just, Kathy, why don't you come up here and explain what that is and where it goes from and to. I think it's a terrific asset for Westchester County. So,
South County.
yeah, come on up.
Nothing like being put on the spot.
Come on, you could do it. I have confidence in
Because
you.
my last name is O'Connor.
Yeah.
V.E. Macy Park is just awesome. Ironically, the Sprain Parkway cut through it. So we've got the Sprain Ridge Park, as well as V.E. Macy with the highway going through it.
Right.
The South County Trail is part of the North County South County Trail. and it's actually finished at this point. We finally got through. We're down to, I believe we started the Putnam line, and it goes all the way down to the Bronx. And so we're very excited about that. We just finished redoing the North County Trail. And
What's the park it goes through that it ends in the southern end? I forget the name of it. You know, just south of the Cross County Parkway there alongside Sawmill. Tibbetts Brook?
Tibbetts Brook Park,
Yeah, yeah.
sure. Well, that's one of the other facilities that we have that the South County Trail actually goes through too.
Right.
But part of the reason why it was chosen for Macy is because of the serenity of being there and being able to go over there. And I know it's wild right now because we are doing a huge capital project. Between that dam is being removed, it will then be, the river flows through it, so all beautiful landscape will be done. But also there's a restaurant going into the
Finally.
cantina.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I'll take full credit for that.
Well, you should.
It's Benjamin's Steakhouse. Believe it or not, and everybody knows that you can't take a left going, to get into it and all that. But anyway, I don't want to take any more of your time. So eventually, it'll be unbelievable for
And
your memorial because Benjamin's Steakhouse is going to be gorgeous. The river is going to be beautiful.
Outdoor dining there too?
Pardon me?
Will it be outdoor dining at the lakefront?
Yes, outdoor dining. The whole thing. It'll be beautiful.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a question because it's so out of the way. I've taken all kinds of people there, but it's tucked away. And even if you're on the trail, there's no signage from the trail that tells you it's there. It's sort of a hidden gem.
Yes, that will be. That's
will
all
that be
part of what we're going to be
corrected?
doing.
Yeah,
Yes.
because people should see it. It's magnificent.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah, there is
That'll
a-
all be part of our renovation.
There is a sign along the parkway, right, where you turn off into
Yes.
when it
Yes.
reopens.
So, yes, one of our.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
county
I understand.
300 Memorial.
We have another question back here?
I'd like the county to be more involved with that memorial because it's ripping. And for a number of years, one, there was no sign on the Sawmill River Parkway to indicate where the memorial was. And it took several years of phone calls to finally get a sign put up. But then, now with the renovations going on at the park, there ought to be some thought to moving the memorial so it's more accessible to people.
That would be quite an undertaking. I had a hard time moving this maquette. So, anyway, that's about the location. Yes, sir.
I realize that the new generation doesn't know how to read maps, but for something like this, wouldn't a small map detailing which highways to get off and where it's located be an annotation?
So, Kathy, I think there is
Yes.
information on the. Is there information on the county website and
Yes.
also on the parks website?
Yes, yes. And once we're completed, all the signage will match because you can imagine Benjamin's Steakhouse wants people to know how to get there. So that coupled with what we're doing, the environmental side, and honoring your memorial, our memorial,
Right.
all the signage will match up.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Well, yeah, I think it's going to. The steakhouse is going to be where the old Layton's was, right?
Yeah, where La Cantina, that looks horrendous at this point, will be the renditions of what they've shown. It's unbelievable. And they understand it's not a drop-in place. You go by reservation, and you'll learn to just go through Duff's Ferry and get back on the sun when you get in. So,
Right.
yes.
Well, is that going to be additional Benjamins, or are they going to be?
Additional, Benjamin's too.
Okay. So, do we have another question in the back there?
Yeah, I was just wondering, at one time they had boats out when it was like a lake area. Are they going to do anything like that when it's Benjamin?
No, the lake will be gone. It's going to be a river running through it, all wildflower, all our shrubs, whatever will be planted. It'll be beautiful, but again,
So, what? My wife's giving me the sign to speed it up. I actually want to know. We have a number of men here. I'm assuming that a number of you are either married or been married. How many of you listen to your wives? So one of the big mistakes I made with the Great Hunger Memorial was I didn't listen to my wife. She wasn't my wife then, so I could be excused maybe. But she said, you know, you got to be careful because some of these people on the committee, they're a nasty bunch. And we had no idea how nasty they were until we completed the project. So we raised about $1.5 million of cash. We also got a number of donations in kind. So like Cablevision gave us their studio and their staff to make a video that we used to help educate people and to help raise awareness and raise funds. And then we had Tom O'Connor and his wife Mary O'Connor were on a committee, and they developed these 4 very effective signs. When this is over, you can, and these were kind of like ad signs, and we actually were able to, the MTA gave us their train stations for free, and we had this series of posters up at commuter stations in Westchester to, again, create awareness and help us raise money. And then, as Barbara said, with these books, we had a fabulous fundraiser at the Rye-Town Hilton, which unfortunately is closed down. And we had terrific showing, great musical entertainment, great an evening not to be forgotten. And so we actually raised more money than we needed, which is not always what happens. And we had a dedication in V.E. Macy Park for the memorial in June of 2001. And it was a great event, a beautiful sunny day. A number of people got up to talk, and then we had a little reception party afterwards with some Irish musicians, and it was just a very, very proud moment and culmination of what was a great project that so many people helped out with. Unfortunately, the sun rose the next morning, and I went to work, and I was leaving my office around 4 o'clock because I was coaching my son's Little League team, and the girl at reception said, "Oh, someone dropped this off for you," and they handed me a box. And I just took it and threw it in my car and didn't look at it. When I got home from the Little League game, I opened it up, and it was empty. There was nothing in it except a letter from one of our committee members, a woman by the name of Eleanor McDonald, advising me that I was fired as the chairman of the commission, and she was disbanding the committee, and she was seizing control of approximately $500,000 of leftover funds, which we intended to use for awareness for and to help hunger in Westchester County, food pantries, etc. And that began the beginning of a 3-year new journey, which was to try to get the memorial back and get the money back. And this group of people who were, a number of them were involved at the time with the Conservative Party of Westchester, and at that time the Conservative Party was important because they could be a tiebreaker between the Democrats and the Republicans. The politics in Westchester has shifted now so that it's pretty much dominantly one-party Democratic rule. But in those days, a lot of the county board of legislators might be split 9-8, and there were both Republicans and Democrats running against each other, and getting the support of a third party sometimes was the tipping balance. So a number of the people were afraid to lock horns. Fortunately, Andy Spano wasn't one of them. And when I went to see him, before this whole news broke, it wasn't public yet, to tell him what happened, he just shook his head and smiled, and he said, "Let that be a lesson to you. No good deed goes unpunished." And he was right. And so we went to, since we were a not-for-profit, we went to the Attorney General's office in New York State, and we also went to the Westchester District Attorney's office. And Janine Pirro was then our county DA, and I spoke to her about it, and she said, "Well, I don't know what you're upset about. I don't see anything that's wrong here." And I said, "The artist who built this memorial has not been paid. They're holding the money hostage, and they're insisting, this splinter group, that in order for him to get paid, he had to sign off over all his artistic rights, creative rights to them." And his response to them was classic Irish. He said, "Well, I suppose everybody has a price. And I certainly do have a price, but that's not enough." And he told them what they could do with themselves. And then they went to Andy Spano's office, and they said, you know, you're running for re-election, and if you want our support, you have to come on our side. And he said, get the hell out of my office. So then we went to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General, I remember meeting with this guy, James Piggott, who was Assistant Attorney General. He sat there and told myself and my attorney, well, what are you upset about? What do you care? Everybody knows the memorial's great, it's been built, and everybody knows you were instrumental in building it, so why don't you just walk away? And I said, I'm not walking away. So what happened was, for about 3 years, the Attorney General of New York State was basically on aiding and abetting the criminals to try to get the thing to go away, because they didn't want the bad press. And anyway, we started a lawsuit, and at one point the judge in Westchester Supreme Court ordered these people to turn over the books and records that they had also stolen. And I remember sitting in this attorney's office in Tarrytown, you know, that building that's just north of the bridge and faces out on the Hudson. And I was sitting there in boxes of paper, and I'm going through the stuff, and I get to the canceled checkbook for June of 2001. And I flip through, and I see a check for $50 or something like that. And it's not my signature on the check. And I see 2 or 3 more, all checks under $100 with my signature, which wasn't my signature. And then I see a check that transfers all the money out of Sound Shore Federal Savings and Loan and puts it in another bank where Eleanor McDonald and 1 or 2 of her cronies had control of the money. So they removed we had a double signing check situation. So Eleanor volunteered to be our controller. We foolishly allowed her to be our controller, but we had two signatures, and the other 2 signatures were myself and County Legislator Lou Masiello. And they walked into the bank and removed us as signatories, transferred the money to another bank that they had total control of. So how did they do it? Well, part of the reason they got away with it was Eleanor at the time was a controller she had served several different municipalities as a controller. So she had all of the tax money for that municipality at Sound Shore Federal. So she was able to walk in and do what she wanted to do. And then she transferred the money to another bank where she had millions of dollars of tax money. And neither of those banks wanted anything, you know, they were clammed up. We don't know what you're talking about. They wouldn't turn over information. So when we found these forgeries, I went back to Janine Pirro, and she said, well, I still don't see that there was any crime committed. I said, you know, grand theft forgery is a Class A felony, and stealing $500,000 is a Class A felony. And if you don't know that they're crimes, you shouldn't really be in your job. And then when we went back to the Attorney General's office, they basically said the same thing. So we wound up in front of a judge who fortunately was clear-minded and understood what happened. And at that time, their attorney, a guy by the name of Anthony Anea, who was working pro bono for this splinter group, he asked the judge to relieve him because he wasn't getting paid. And the judge said, you're not being relieved, you stay there and you represent them, and I don't care if you get paid or not. And so finally the judge forced the money to be turned over, and it went to charitable causes. The artist got paid, the artist kept his artistic rights. And then when this whole thing played out, in 2004, the county had a rededication of the monument. And that's when they gave me this chairman's award, because they recognized the kind of a personal hell, not only I, but all the committee members went through to see this, you know, great communal effort be like just thrown in a garbage pail. But at the end of the day, we preserved, and it was worthwhile fighting for. I will tell you that. So there's I want to, hopefully I can read this because my songs are disappearing, but so my partner Howard Parnes, who's deceased, obviously he wasn't Irish, but he was very supportive of the project, as were a lot of people, not just Irish people, but people involved in our community. And he used to have a quote on his desk, and I found it last night, so I'm going to read it to you. And this is by ex-president, not a very formidable guy, Calvin Coolidge, president during the 1920s. And he had this quote on the power of persistence. I'll read it to you. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. And so if you ever get a challenge in your life, don't take the easy way out. Do the right thing, and you'll find yourself well rewarded. So any questions? Yes.
I was very impressed with what was the writing that accompanied that. It was right to the point and direct.
Yeah.
No punches were pulled.
No.
Did you have any blowback from that?
No. I was just talking to John before we started, and I was saying, the whole thing, even today, seems crazy to me. Why would someone deliberately create a train wreck on something they were trying to create? And I think, probably petty jealousy. And, they saw other people being able to do what they weren't able to do and getting credit. So
My question, was in terms of what you had written on the memorial, which
Yes.
is strongly and appropriately anti-British.
Well, it's not.
Like no punches were pulled when
Yeah,
you were
so-
saying those things, and I was just wondering if the British Embassy or anyone that was looking at it was.
They never contacted me to complain. But look. The truth is the truth,
Right.
and their actions were totally inadequate, and millions of people died because of it. And the tragedy is that it could have very easily been solved because there were 55 warehouses in Ireland with plenty of food for everybody.
And I think it was great that actually.
Yeah, but if you think about how the world is and what it is today, unfortunately, history does repeat itself. And you find people, especially poor people in countries around the world, who are subject to famine or hunger or starvation, because they don't really have anyone to fend for themselves, and maybe the people in power don't want or care to help them, and so people needlessly die when it can be avoided. Anyone else? No, thank you. It was fun. Come get some soda bread and don't starve. Oh, sorry. One question.
I just have to say this. My mother came from the county Clare, and she was born in 1899. She came to the U.S. in 1922, and it cost her $10 to come. And she got left out of Liverpool. My father was born in Roscommon in 1888. And I really can't find anything about him. Somehow I think he was involved with the IRA. But he did teach me one thing. He's married. Be proud that you are Irish.
Yeah. So it was funny. One thing I'm just thinking about now when you started to talk about that, when we did this video that was really excellently done, we brought different people in to be interviewed. And I sat off camera like they do in 60 Minutes or whatever, and just prompted people, talk about this, talk about that. And one of the people talked about how they would send, the Irish who came here, even though they were trying to get a foothold, they would send money back to Ireland to help the families in Ireland. And one guy got a letter from his mother in Ireland that said, "Thank you so much for your recent letter and your $5. It's nice to hear from you. By the way, I got a letter from your brother. He sent $10. So we don't want anyone to starve. So Mary was kind enough in the fire department to bring us all this wonderful food. So come up and get a snack.
Jim, thank you so much.
Okay.
This was great.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.